Hey, welcome to the FEE3 showcase for Fire Emblem Deity Device. My name is Zillerite, and this showcase is going to be a little bit different than the other ones that I've done, because this one is a developer interview that we recorded separately from the game footage. There will be game footage playing in the background, just so you have something to watch while we play, and at the end of the interview I will also be talking about the gameplay and giving my thoughts on what you saw playing in the background. Recording this sort of intro just to note that we had some internet connectivity problems. We've done all that we can to try to sort of cut out any footage that was unusable, but there might be, hiccups and such that we just really didn't have an alternative to. So apologies in advance for any weirdness that comes from that. We did the best we could with what we had. Hopefully the interview is still enjoyable. I know I had a lot of fun conducting it. And without further ado, I'm going to cut to that interview footage. I hope you enjoy. Alright, so I have here with me the game's developer, Permafrost, here to answer a few questions about the game. Howdy, Permafrost.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Before we get started here, I'm going to allow the game to explain itself here with a bit of some special FEE3 exclusive dialogue here. Alright, and let's just get started with the questions here while we have the gameplay running in the background. So Permafrost, what inspired a lot of Deity Device's more unique design decisions? The game's very famous for having a lot of really bold and unique mechanics in it. It has a strong focus on mages and long-range combat, and a sort of uniquely small, tight-knit cast. I know I've had a lot of people tell me that the game is super inspired by the Tales franchise, which I'm not familiar with. Did a lot of that translate into gameplay at all, or did your influences come from elsewhere?
Yeah, so the focus on mages is pretty much just because I always thought mages were cooler than waving around a pointy stick. Like all the stories that climax with a descendant of whatever getting the magic sword. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is happening now. Great. I mean, doing it based on magic allowed the characters to have more control because they weren't really dependent on some bloodline. It was more about learning how the system actually worked. As far as the tight-knit cast, that's just another personal preference of mine. Implementing a character into a hack is a lot of work. You have to make character art and come up with their classes and their recruitment and whatever. And if someone's kind of a nothing character, I'm not really going to be that motivated to work on them and put them in the game. And I was kind of aware that the game was pretty Iron Man unfriendly as I was developing it, but I kind of just let that go because implementing like 10 or 20 more characters into the game would have just been a huge slog for me, and I'm not sure if I would have actually done it, gotten the game done, that is.
Yeah, that's an important part of the process, huh? Actually finishing the
Yeah,
game.
definitely. Um, as far as the Tales series, I think like a lot of people might be zeroing in on the fact that Symphonia, which is probably one of the better known ones, at least in the West. Um, it was a big game on the GameCube. It was probably the biggest RPG on the GameCube, except maybe like Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. So a lot of FE fans of a certain age who bought the GBA because of Marth and Melee might have, a lot of them probably played Symphonia. And it was really pushed in Nintendo Power at the time. But there's a character who's supposed to die to save the world, and that has some corollaries with Deity device. But I mean that's a pretty common fantasy trope.
Yeah, for me,
And
I remember distinctly thinking as I got further and further through Callista's plot, I was like, wow, this is a lot like Final Fantasy X, huh? Because that's the only real JRPG I've ever played.
yeah, it was, and it's more, it was, it was. I more wanted to like kind of react to that trope as far as how the characters who are put in that position, they often just have this serene acceptance, and I wanted to try and write like a more human view of that, where the person who's supposed to do that isn't this perfect saint, and like nothing about the world bothers them, and the idea of saving this world doesn't get to them. um but yeah, and I guess Symphonia also has a lot of themes about the value of life, which people might see parallels to in the dialogue. But I would say the plot of Deity Device, more than being influenced by the Tales series, is rooted in objectivist philosophy, and there's a lot of that comes out in the Tales series. So it might be more that there's sprung from the same philosophical base
I see.
independently. Like the most recent game, Berseria, there's this riddle that passes back and forth between the main protagonist and the villains. Why does a bird fly? And then the answer she settles on at the end of the game is a birds fly because they are birds, which is to say that it is in the nature of a bird to fly, and that is why a bird will fly, which in the context of the story, it is a man should be free because it is in the nature of man to act volitionally. So there's a similar philosophical root that runs through the Tales series in Deity Device, but I wouldn't really say I was directly influenced. The theme of the game was always meant to be, from its inception, the evil of treating a human as a means to an end. And I think I stuck to that more than making my
Right.
story directly parallel to anything else.
I think probably one of the most fascinating parts about Deity Device for me, back when I played it earlier this year, was just the degree to which the writing was very human, very grounded, very mature. It's something where a lot of Fire Emblem ROM hacks, I feel, have a very sort of grandiose, larger than life feeling to them, or else they feel a lot of them don't have as big an emphasis on the storytelling. A lot of them just want to have like a fun game experience. It's like, nice and enjoyable, and has like cool characters. So I remember being very pleasantly surprised by just how characters like Callista were handled.
Mhm.
And of course, I don't want to get into too much detail about that because if people want to see what happens with Callista for themselves, they should play the game.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things your project's really notable for is after it came out earlier this year, there was like a huge outpouring of community support where tons of artists from throughout the community came in to contribute sort of overhauls of the existing characters. Because prior you had done all of the artwork for the game.
Artwork and quotes.
Don't worry, I've had some
Yeah,
pretty shoddy artwork as well in my time.
for those who came to the game recently, yeah, my avatar on FEU is my crusty original Carson design.
It's always funny to compare the two for me, but yeah, it was really a big thing for a while. I remember hanging around the Discord, you'd have a lot of people sort of excitedly coming in and being like, "Look, I got on the Deity device train. Here's my Deity device portrait," and everyone was sort of clamoring to be a part of it. I have to imagine that for you as a developer, that must have been a sort of humbling experience to have such a direct connection with the community like that.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. I mean, no one was really compensated for that. They just kind of came to me. Like, first, Citrus asked about making a portrait, and then after I got theirs, just a few people, like, out of the blue were like, "Hey, I made this character. Feel free to use it." And I was like, "Oh, wow. That's really cool." It also helped with improving the battle palettes because I just took the colors directly from the new portraits and implemented them in the battle animations. It's actually a bit of a funny story, but because Pandan explained to me that people don't really like the FE7 colors on backlit screens because they're too bright and the original GBA was not backlit. I spent a lot of time as a child playing FE7 connected to the GameCube through the Game Boy player and playing it on a TV. So those bright, fluorescent FE7 colors never registered to me as retina burning. So yeah, people really kind of helped me develop a better color tone for the game.
I think it's very interesting to compare sort of where Deity Device now with where it started. So you somewhat recently completed like a pretty major overhaul of the game in its 2.0 update. And it was
Yeah.
kind of like, it's really crazy to compare that to like the 1.0 version because I had played both and 2.0 is like such a massive improvement. I know that you've added a new character, a new Gaiden, you reworked several chapters, including the one that we're playing here right now. What was it like to go through such like a major period of rework immediately after finishing the game? Because it was like right after you published the thread, you had like the initial wave of sort of support and opinions come in, and you were like right back to the grindstone trying to perfect the game from where you had it originally.
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't. I guess it wasn't really something I felt great about doing right away. Just to like think I had this thing done and then right back to it. But yeah, I just didn't want people to not play it or to develop a bad reputation because of some of the flaws of the original release, and it just kind of get buried. So that's what kind of got me to get back into it and kind of evaluate what people were telling me, what wasn't working, and and rework the game.
I think you've done a very good job of that, honestly. A lot of the changes from 2.0 were like really good. I love the archer character that you added. He was one of my favorite units to use
Yeah.
as I got further and further into late game and got some of his fancier bows from later on. What were some of the changes that
Yeah.
you're like most fond of that you made to 2.0? Like just things that you added that you feel like really were large improvements than you expected.
Vincent, the archer that you mentioned, he's definitely one of my favorites just because his dialogue with Lucy was really fun to write. Um, where she kind of thinks he's a big bozo. But also the spell, um the charges per chapter, I think it makes things work more smoothly. Um you definitely can't solo with some of the mages like you could in 1.0. Um just recently I actually had someone message me and ask me what patch I used to pull that off, and I was like, it's not a patch, it's long event script.
That's fascinating that it's done via an event string. I never would have guessed that. I would have thought for sure it was some kind of riff off the Gaiden magic system or something similar. That's really cool.
At the end of every chapter end event, it calls the event that does it.
That's really interesting. One of Data Advice's greatest strengths is its script, I think, like far and away. It's got this, like I was saying before, it has this really strong, well-developed cast of characters, in part because the cast is very small, but also just in part because a lot of them are given sort of very detailed dynamics between each other and arcs that a lot of them go through over the course of the game. And it leads to a like almost like an ensemble RPG cast kind of vibe, where it's more than just like, oh, this is my sword master. In some of his supports, he says edgy things, but like several characters have entire guidance devoted to them, where they get unique weapons and sort of grow as characters, and their relationship to other characters grows with them. I would be absolutely fascinated to hear like some of the process that went into creating these characters and their dynamics and their arcs and everything else, because they really they form the heart of the game and the story. And of course, you shouldn't. I don't want you to spoil the spicy stuff, the really crazy stuff that happens later. But some of the process that went into it, I think, would be really, really fascinating to hear about.
Yeah, I agree that in a lot of ways the characters feel more like RPG party members than SRPG units. This information's buried somewhere in the thread long ago, but for Carson, a lot of things about him were inspired by an article I read which hypothesized that villains are often more popular than the heroes of stories because the villain is doing what they want. The villain is a more liberated person than the hero, where becoming the hero usually means you're like putting all this other stuff out of yourself. So when I wrote Carson, I wanted to write a protagonist who is a fully liberated person. So this might come across as arrogant to say, but I think that Carson might be the kind of character people are trying to write when they wind up writing an edgelord, but they wind up digging too deep into the edgelord's hatred of everything and everything sucks but me. Where with Carson, I wanted to write him as a more human character who's willing to hit people. And I think why nobody comes into the thread and says Carson is an edgelord, even though that um, I think Carson is what people are actually wanting to create when they wind up making an edgelord.
As a
As
as a
far as
certified writer of edgelords, I think it's very interesting to look at how writing gets interpreted as edgy or not edgy, often just based on like small things like texture and stuff. Because I never personally found Carson edgy. I thought he was like I thought it was kind of funny. I think I occasionally referred to him as being like a little bit of a Reddit atheist in a lot of his conversations, just because he just kind of walk into conversations and be like, "So Nathan, God's not real, right?" And I was, but it was mostly in good fun.
Yeah,
I thought he was pretty well written overall. Um, so you definitely succeeded in that task, I think, for sure.
yeah. And then
Uh,
as far as some of the other character dynamics, I kind of just enjoy taking two characters and crashing them together and seeing what happens. Like a lot of Helen's arc just came from me thinking. So I wrote this girl who's supposed to be Callista's knight, and she's like this bubbly, man hungry girl. So like how would Jake react to that? Like what's Jake gonna think seeing this girl who's supposed to be a knight acting like that? And that's where a lot of the um so yeah, a lot of the character dynamics just come from me liking to crash the characters together and seeing what happens.
I think probably one of the most interesting character dynamics for me was the one between Glenn and Callista throughout Act
Yeah.
One. Again, without spoiling too much of what happens between them, um, a lot of Glenn's characterization and the way of oh my gosh, the way a lot of that characterization is done via the way that he treats Callista was some of the best writing in the game. I think it was really really interesting. Um, it was particularly I found it like I think I even mentioned on the thread, but I found the writing of their characters and the specific way that they interact to be like very human and very real and very raw. Um, do you have anything about the two of them in particular that you wanted to that you'd feel comfortable talking about? Because I
Yeah,
found that to be
so
like one of the most fascinating parts of the game.
yeah, so without getting into too much, without spoiling too much, I mean, with those two, those are the moments where when I'm going back to like proof the dialogue and make sure the cutscene is playing correctly. If I sometimes I'll like read a bit of their dialogue and just be like, oh wow, that came out of my head. That's a little scary.
Oh,
I thought of that.
oh man, no, I know that feeling really well. That's awesome. No, there are definitely a few lines in their arc where I read them and I was like, holy fuck. Yeah, no, that's definitely. I can see that being the reaction, just be like, damn, fuck. How'd I come up with this stuff? Who writes this?
But I mean, like, yeah, he's like kind of this crazy guy who like practically needs like a Disney villain song, but no one would like it because he's such an asshole.
And I think the thing that really sells him is that a lot of the ways that he's an asshole, it's like a very mundane kind of asshole. You probably know a guy
Yeah,
like Glenn in college, except the guy that you knew in college who's like Glenn uh, is not a prince and is not granted like magical power. So
yeah,
it's sort of using the trappings of fantasy to tell the story of a very real and grounded kind of character. Somebody who is sort of a bad person in ways that manifest in the real world very frequently. And I think that was what really, really drew me to the character was the
yeah,
degree to which I found his sort of less nice qualities um, to be very much like grounded in reality. I can see somebody in the position that he's in becoming the kind of person that he is, and I found that fascinating. And in a very similar way, I found Callista's reaction to sort of the kind of person that he is and the kind of pressures that she was under. Again, going back to that sort of JRPG-esque, sacrificing yourself for the sake of the world plotline. I think that was also much the same, very grounded, very real, and it gave it a lot of very raw emotionality that I think a lot of ROM hacks don't really ever achieve. Even in their emotional moments, it's always sort of disconnected from reality or other forms of storytelling and has a very much like Fire Emblem-y kind of emotionality. Whereas this was very different. I think that's one of the things that's most fascinating about Deity Device's writing, is just the way that it is so different from a lot of what you see in the Fire Emblem sphere, while still obviously taking like major cues from that kind of storytelling. It's familiar but distinct, I would say.
Yeah. Um,
So,
yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Is like you really could see someone acting like Glenn if they get too full of themselves.
so with development on Deity Device, uh, at least to my knowledge, coming to a close here, are there any like insights from the development process that you feel like you'd like to share? Things that are like more general, things that you learned throughout the process, or things that you just found like interesting or surprising about the development process?
Hmm. Um, I guess it's how so often there's just a way to kind of twist these nearly 20-year-old GBA games to do what you want. Like even with me not really knowing that much ASM editing, there's usually something out there that would let me make FE8 into Deity Device. Because I mean, there's a lot of stuff under the hood there that's making it a more unique experience. And it was always it seemed don't seem to be as many new ones recently, but for a while it was like every time FE Builder updated, there'd be like new patches, and I was like, well, what is this gonna do? And then you think like, can that do anything for me? So I think that was one of the cooler parts of the process, and I mean, and just that the community has made the skill system and all that work in GBA is pretty amazing.
Oh, the stuff the community has done is incredible. Like, just unprecedented. So good.
Yeah, it really is.
I think it's very interesting seeing the way that you interpreted the tools that things like Skill System provided to you, because it's allowed you to create a very interesting sandbox with Deity Device. Particularly, like, I remember, I've probably ranted about this at least like 8 times before, but Vesta is one of my favorite units in like a ROM hack. For anyone who hasn't played the game, Vesta's your dancer. You get her as you move into disc 2 of the game, because of course the game is on 3 discs. Just lending to that JRPG-esque vibe. And she has 2 things that make her very unique. One of them is that she has a renamed version of Power Staff, which, in conjunction with her physics spell, which due to the mechanics of the game she always has available to her, allows her to do a lot of very creative positioning, in conjunction with her other really important skill, which is a massive boost to damage and speed for anybody standing next to her. You may have noticed in the footage that is technically not recorded at the time of me saying this, but I do know how I play the game. I'm very frequently doing things like placing Carson next to Vesta. He has a very, very low magic stat and very low growths in it, and Vesta allows him to sort of tap into a lot of the latent power of a lot of his spells because his spells are really good, even if his stats aren't. Um, and in conjunction with his high critical rate and his speed, it lets him do a lot of crazy stuff. And even beyond just that, the wider cast can also still make great use of her buff. And sort of planning out at the start of every turn, like all the places I want Vesta to be. Where's she at the start of the turn? Where is she at the middle of the turn? Where am I gonna put her when I like use her to dance a unit and get another move out of them? Just trying to like get the absolute maximum out of that buff is like probably one of the most fun parts of the game. And it really makes the whole mid game shine when that buff is like the most important sort of part of the sandbox. And I think that's sort of like one of the sort of the gold standard in terms of the way that you've used skills in this game to give units very distinct and unique kits. A lot of the skills that have been put onto units sort of combine together in very interesting ways to create a unit that works in ways that you don't really see in the wider Fire Emblem sort of experience. Even in the games that do have skills, they're often sort of, you have like a scattered set of skills that do different non-synergistic things, whereas here a lot of those skills are meant to work in tandem with each other to create a very particular kind of unit. And I remember finding that very interesting, learning how each of these units sort of functions and trying to get the most out of them. It's definitely... go ahead, sorry, my bad.
Yeah, that just kind of ties into how the units are more like JRPG party members. I really wanted them to be able to do specific things. I mean, and you talked about Carson. That kind of ties into the character I was trying to write for Carson, where he's absolutely terrible at the thing that he's the most interested in, and he kind of has to learn to rely on the people around him to actually be proficient in it, and just being able to express that in the gameplay was so cool because I think that video games are uniquely tailored to telling hero's journey type stories, because in a book or a movie or a TV show, it's very hard to convey the idea of what the hero's actually doing as far as like combat or trials they have to overcome. Or in a video game, you can forge the connection between the audience and that idea through the gameplay. You see what these characters are capable of through the gameplay, and it's just really cool how because skill system is there, I was able to put another layer of expressing that idea of characterization into the game.
I would definitely describe it as being very impressive, the ways that you've managed to tie in sort of the thematic elements of the game script into its gameplay in a lot of sort of like hard-baked ways. People talk about a lot about sort of gameplay story integration when talking about, map objectives and things like that. And I think sort of this game is a rare example of just like the sort of like a totality of gameplay story integration, where it's just like the characters themselves, the way they function, is so intrinsic to their arcs and a lot of what the story is trying to tell. And that's something that I think is very rare, even just for video games, honestly, let alone ROM hacks. It's very, very impressive what was done in that regard.
Yeah, like as far as bad story gameplay integration, I always think of like the Talius dragons, where Kurth Naga's like this huge imposing thing that levels a fortress, and then you get him in gameplay and he's dead weight. Awful. It just kind of ruins the effect.
So I think that's in a little bit of a weird limbo because I'm recording this without knowing exactly how long gameplay is going to take. But I have a suspicion at this point the chapter's being wrapped up. So I think it would be best, because I'm more or less out of questions here, unless you have something in particular that you think would be really cool to talk about before we sort of close up here. That this would be a good place to sort of end the interview, and if there's extra time left, just take it to generic commentary on the map that's being played.
Yeah, I think we covered everything that I wanted to get across. So.
All right, that's awesome. Oh, it was fantastic speaking to you. I'm really, really excited to be presenting this game, and hopefully this lines up well with the end of the chapter. Otherwise, I'm going to have to spend like 10 minutes talking about chapter 19. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, though, thanks for coming. It was really nice getting a chance to talk to you about the game. A lot of really interesting insight, stuff that it's just really cool. All right. 10 minutes, he says. I'll have to talk about chapter 19 for 10 minutes. Little did he know, there's 20 minutes left in the video. I really thought that we had more that was said than we actually had, so apologies, you're going to hear me ramble for the next 20 minutes. Luckily, I'm one of the more interesting people in the world, so that should be very entertaining for you. I'd like to reiterate the apology from the beginning of the video about the internet and audio quality problems that we had. What you saw was basically the best that I could pick out from amongst a bunch. There was just this period in the middle of the interview that was like, it just got really rough, and there was very little that I could actually do to fix it besides trying to cut out the bits that were really, really bad and request that he re-record them during the interview. And anything that I didn't request got redid. I just had to use what we had. So hopefully it was still interesting and you managed to get a greater understanding of the game. I know a lot of people who have already played the game were really, really excited to hear that I was going to get the chance to speak to Permafrost. He sometimes comes across as a bit of an elusive individual, hiding there on his forums where us Discord people can't reach him. But yeah, it was very fun to get to do that interview. On topic, though, you can see here we're doing the recruitment conversation between Layla and Gregory. And Gregory's one of my favorite characters in the game. He's rad. He's awesome. A fun note about this conversation is the contents of the dialogue have actually been changed, as you'll see, to reflect the fact that this is an FE3 showcase. And it's sort of hard to get the proper context for what's actually going on in this discussion if you haven't sort of played up to this point. There's a lot of like long-running character dynamic stuff that runs throughout this game. So it makes jumping into chapter 19 sort of like, you know, plunging your head into the deep end of the pool when you don't know how to swim. So I didn't actually know that the dialogue had been changed at first. So I remember I found it very funny when he just basically interrupts the discussion to go, no, we're not actually going to have this discussion. We're moving on. But now we have access to Gregory, and Gregory is very, very powerful light mage. Probably one of your best units. Up until you get to the very, very latest stages of the game when your protagonists are starting to unlock their strongest spells. I wanted to take a moment to just talk about sort of the wider gameplay sandbox of Deity Device, because I did discuss gameplay in the interview, but I was far, far more focused on discussing the things that personally interested me, which were things like the plot and the thematic sort of flourishes of the game. I think the game excels at those far more than most other ROM hacks. So I really wanted to get straight to the heart of that. Sorry, and see like where were the influences that led to the game? How did they sort of come to be? Oh, I remember this. I think I tried for a very long time to find like the exact set of numbers that would like kill this guy in one shot for for no reason. And I realized partway through that I was like wasting time, and I could just kill him with overkill damage and not care about it. But yeah, I wanted to talk about gameplay here. This character to the south of Helen here, Vesta, our dancer, is one of the more fascinating characters I've ever played with in a ROM hack. I believe I mentioned it during the interview, but I love Vesta to bits. Extremely fun unit to use. If you haven't been paying attention to the footage very closely, Vesta's main gimmick comes in two forms. The first is she has a very powerful buff ability. Anyone who is adjacent to her gets massive bonuses to speed and attack. This is especially useful for Carson, who has very low base magic and very low magic growths. Using that ability, he can more or less simulate having better stats than he actually has, and do things that he wouldn't otherwise be able to do, pick up kills that should be beyond him, and requires a lot of careful positioning and thinking about the order that you want to do moves in. And it's made far more interesting by the inclusion of the infinite use physics staff, because remember, spells are infinite in this game, so any spell somebody has, you can guarantee they'll have in every chapter for the rest of the game. So between that and her power staff ability, allowing her to move after she heals, she manages to, not only can she fulfill the role of healer and dancer on the same turn, but she also gets to be in two places on the map per turn. 3 if you include where she starts her turn. Which means that you could potentially have her basically buff almost the entire party if you were very careful and the stars sort of aligned for you to position such that you were able to have her at the epicenter of all of your units on every turn. So choosing exactly when to use her was always really interesting. It would lead to a lot of funny little interactions. For instance, sometimes you would want somebody to take damage just so that you have a heal target for Vesta so that she can sort of move further. The Gregory crit, you love to see it. So, I found, personally, Vesta to be, like, sort of emblematic of the things that Deity Device's gameplay is best at. The things that it's most unique for. Because definitely, like, if you've been watching the footage closely, you'll have noticed that, like, yeah, it's Fire Emblem. You know, it's got Fire Emblem classes, it's got, you know, Fire Emblem stats, but at the end of the day, a lot of the way that this game plays is very different from a typical Fire Emblem game. It's got the same DNA, but it's so thoroughly its own beast in a way that a lot of ROM hacks don't really achieve, in my opinion. A lot of ROM hacks will feel like they're sort of vanilla plus, or maybe they've taken some inspiration from Thracia or Genealogy, and so they have some more Kaga-isms, so to speak, in them. And that's not a bad thing, mind you. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the fact that that's sort of what most hacks do. I mean, it's what my own project does. That's what a lot of my favorite projects have done. But Deity Device really succeeds at feeling like 1 HP, at feeling like it's really its own game, separate from the Fire Emblem games, in some small but meaningful ways. And I think probably one of the most notable ways that Deity Device differs from the standard fare FEGBA game really comes from the way it uses its cast. Um, I've said it a couple times, I think, by now, but the ensemble cast sort of approach that this game takes leads to units feeling extremely unique. The game is not very Iron Man friendly. A lot of games aren't Iron Man friendly. And it sort of sacrifices that sort of potentiality of like a nice Iron Man-y flow to instead have a really well-developed cast. Not just in terms of character, although they are definitely well-developed as characters, but just in terms of the way that their kits differ from one another and bounce off of one another. The Carson and Vesta example that I already gave is a good one. But then there's also little things, like Carson has very poor res and very high defense. And Nathan has his infinite use long range barrier staff, which early on is actually his only spell. So one of his only options for contributing to the fight is to buff people's resistance to allow them to take on mages that they would otherwise be less inclined to fight for, for their own safety. Nathan allows you to sort of circumvent that and push your units into being capable of things that they wouldn't otherwise be capable of. I briefly mentioned towards the end of that interview that there was sort of I believe the term I used was a totality of a gameplay story integration, which is a somewhat pretentious way of putting it, but it's true. The game does puts a lot of legwork into making it so that character kits line up with the character themselves in a lot of interesting ways. It's not 100%. Some characters just have kits that are like fun, in the regular way. But for the most part, characters have kits that are thematic in some way, which is really cool. It's something that you don't really see elsewhere at least not to the same degree and with the consistency that you see it in this game. Little things like, oh, this guy's scary, so he has Intimidate, are like pretty simple, but things like the way a character's kit changes throughout the course of the game ends up reflecting sort of their character growth. Nathan begins the game very, very dependent on others, as does Carson. And by the end of the game, when they've unlocked their full kit and they're at full power, and they're capable of, everything in their arsenal, their powerhouses, their machines, they can do insane things. And because those sort of steps of gaining power aren't just tied to, getting a lot of speed level ups or something, but are instead tied to acquiring new spells and new skills through major story moments, makes them stick with you. You remember, like, the circumstances behind sort of Nathan unlocking his first combat spell, or Carson's promotion, which I won't spoil. They're awesome. They're big, cool story character moments. They're big, cool gameplay moments. They change the way that your unit works permanently in a really fun and engaging way. And I think that that's really, really cool. I think it's done in a really sort of engaging, fascinating way. In general, I just find that the way Deity Device uses its story to influence its gameplay, and the way it uses its gameplay to tell its story, is basically unparalleled in the ROM hacking scene right now. There are games that have good gameplay, and there are games that have good stories, and there's games that put a lot of effort into gameplay story integration, but there's very few games that manage to achieve the exact level of gameplay and story synthesis that you see in a game like Deity Device. Um, and I think that's something that Permafrost should be very, very, very proud of. Um, Returning to discussing the chapter at hand here, we're down to more or less just the boss for now. There's a couple chests that we need to grab. I believe, cut out the part where I'm just walking to grab the chest because I was a little bit slow with moving my FIFA around. So I was behind a couple turns on hitting up those chests. So I just stood around the throne for a minute to grab them towards the end. But mostly what's going to happen towards the end of this chapter is I'm going to be positioning people who can pierce through enemy resistance, which is a pretty sizable chunk of my mages actually. Positioning them in such a way that they can whittle down the boss over the course of a couple turns without having to take a counterattack from him, because I believe he has a really scary tome that can crit that I don't want to be next to because it scares me. So we're going to try to kill him either without any reprisal or with very limited reprisal. We'll see how it goes. Right, and Vincent, because Vincent's just incredible. And I didn't have a good reason for not attacking there. I distinctly remember ending his turn and immediately thinking, why'd I do that? Even all these weeks later. So yeah, we're just going to be winding down the chapter here. Yeah, my thoughts on the chapter as I played it were, it was pretty challenging at the start. I had to actually re-record the chapter once. I managed to lose Layla, so I couldn't do the Gregory recruitment, and I was like, oh man, I gotta show the Gregory recruitment. I can't just not. So I had to go back and I had to re-record it. So my thoughts on the chapter overall, it's hard at the start, and then once you break through that like first set of enemies where you've kind of puzzled out the way to burn through the major enemy formations while moving forward, and you've gotten rid of that bishop who's over the wall, and you've sort of figured out a flow to get past the various sleep staffers, the chapter starts to calm down and you can begin to work your way towards just finishing off last of the enemies and finishing it up. Nice and simple and short by Deity Device standards. Deity Device likes to have some big, long, involved maps. Very genealogy inspired. So, you can see here I'm trying to position Helen and Luke in the area. They have skills that can raise my hit rates, and my hit rates against this guy, they're not so good. So raising my hit rates is something that will help a lot. They've made it this far. I love these, I love ROM hack villain mugs. It's always funny to see the same ones pop up again and again and be like, hey, it's that guy. I know that guy. I played a Fire Emblem game. It's cute. So, I've sort of run out of things to talk about that aren't just like me reiterating things that I've said in the interview, or just like saying over and over again, Deity Device good. So instead, Deity Device is getting a sequel. You can see it's getting posted about on the forums if you go and check out the forum thread. I'm personally very excited to see what's next. Some of the info that we have is the way that magic is unique is being tweaked. in this game, as you've noticed, magic tends to be much longer range than it is in the in your typical Fire Emblem game. That's being done away with. Permafrost had his fun with that mechanic and is moving on from it to something that's a little bit easier to design around, I believe. Right now, one of the things that he's been showing off is he's been learning a lot of more complicated summon tech, working summons into the game more concretely than just creating a little phantom dude with an axe. They offer up a lot more positional benefits and offensive power, and I'm very interested to see where he goes with that. You've also got the visual style of the game. It's apparently, because it takes place a couple hundred years after this game, it has more of an emphasis on like a kind of I don't want to say the wrong word here, like a Victorian era kind of deal, I believe, is how you would describe it. It's sort of more like yeah, like Victorian era. Oh, does Nathan get the final hit? Yeah, good job, Nathan. So that game's gonna be I mean, I'm not Permafrost. I don't have an ETA for you. But he's working on it. He's been sharing his progress updates every so often. And I'm super excited to see it because, as I've said probably a billion times, I love Deity Device. I think it's awesome. So we're just going to cut here real quick. Boop. Into the... grabbing these chests. And then we're going to be finished with the chapter. So... that was Fire Emblem Deity Device. I hope you enjoyed this showcase. I had a lot of fun running the interview, and it was really interesting to hear some of the thoughts that went into designing this game. It is a big, ambitious, crazy, unique game, unlike anything else on the scene. I highly recommend that if anything you saw in this video interests you, that you check it out. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your FE3. See ya!